All right, let's get into a Christopher Nolan tier list. I got a lot of requests for this one, which is, it makes sense, right? He's probably the biggest director working today, many people's favorite director working today. I should probably preface this by saying I am not a Christopher Nolan stan, so if you're looking for someone who's just going to gush over all of Nolan's movies, I might not be the person for you. I'm sure there's plenty of YouTubers out there who are doing that. That being said, I still do like Christopher Nolan's movies. I've seen most of them in theaters at this point, and I think that he's certainly a very interesting filmmaker, and his place on cinema is certainly fascinating. I think going through this list could be fun to kind of just track his career as a whole. So yeah. Let's just jump into it. The 5 categories on the obituary. That's the kind of the main ones. When you're on, when he passes away, the few films they'll talk about right away. Then there's the in the box set, the kind of the notable ones that make the box set of if you have like his greatest hits, it's going to be there. Then still good, meh, and if it's one to forget. That is the categories. Let's get into it with following, not the following. It feels like it should be the following, but it's not. Just following. This was actually the only one I hadn't seen prior to the idea to make this list, so I checked it out, and it's fun. It's only 70 minutes, so I think it's free on Tubi right now, so there's ads, but that worth checking out. I think it is a fun film. It's a flawed film. Again, it cost them $6,000 to make this, basically, and all of it was used on film, essentially. So like, that's all they had to work with. That's what they had to make. And it's a flawed movie, right? Like, the characters do not speak like real characters at all. There's the one scene early on where I don't remember the characters' names, but the one guy says to the others like, "I bet you're a starving artist, huh? What are you, a writer?" And it's like, okay, well, that's a bit out of nowhere that happened. There's a bit of clunky dialogue, but again, it's a fun, entertaining story. He kind of goes full Christopher Nolan. I think you can maybe argue this is one to forget because it's not like a spectacular one. I think I'm going to put it in the meh category. It's one that, again, is it weird at times? Sure. Is it sort of goofy? Goofy is the better word. Is it goofy at times? I think so. But I think it really does a lot to talk about what Christopher Nolan would end up becoming, right? It's something that we would, the first time we saw him kind of play with time, first time we saw him do anything, but, we saw him play with time right away, kind of use his score as a massive component of his films in a major way in this one. Not being able to write maybe realistic woman characters is kind of a thing here as well. All of the good and bad with Nolan is fully in this one. So yeah, it's meh. But again, give it, if you're a fan of Nolan and haven't checked it out, you gotta check it out. It's all the Nolan tricks. It's just maybe on a lower budget and not quite as polished as some of the other ones. But I think it's a fun movie. Like, it's a solid watch. Memento, I think, and I'm going chronologically, by the way. Memento, I think, is potentially his best movie. I probably would say it's his best movie. This is on the obituary for me. I rewatched it. I watched it when I was younger. I did this thing where when I was like 18 and just getting into movies, I rewatched like all of, I just watched a bunch of like notable movies essentially, and I feel like sometimes my opinions on certain movies, I'm like, okay, well, 18-year-old me thought that movie was kind of just okay, but that guy was an idiot, so let me check it out now as like a fully functional adult. And yeah, that's what happened with this one. I rewatched it for this video and was really blown away. I think this is, in many ways, this one and another one of Nolan's movies are kind of the two ones it feels like he's been trying to recreate for these past handful of movies, or at least he has in the past. But I think Memento is his best film, not just because of the plot, which the plot is very good. The plot is very well done, but the plot is not what makes Memento work. It just isn't. The reason Memento works the way it does and why it is so effective is because it's probably his most like Kaufman-esque movie in the sense that, yes, there's this crazy plot of, okay, it's one storyline is moving forward while the other storyline is moving backwards, and it's kind of the brilliance of the movie and the trick of the movie is that he can't remember anything, which is how you can kind of give exposition in a way that still makes sense to the audience. It's kind of a brilliant way to do that. But the reason why it works is because it actually explores what that means and what it means to like have memories in the first place and the topic behind it. And it's not just about the plot, but it's about what that plot represents. And I think Nolan is at his best when he ties his crazy narratives in with characters the way that he does with this one. At the end of the day, a plot should always be, a plot and character work together, right? Some people will ask, what's more important, good plot or a good character? The answer is how they work together, and it works amazingly well together. The ending is perfect. There is still a bit of like, I am telling you this now because you'll never remember it, so might as well tell you it now, which feels a bit like they're trying to get the audience to know. But again, that's Nolan. He wants his philosophy is he'd rather put clunky dialogue in a movie, but then you have the information and can enjoy the rest of the movie, then maybe try to do it in a more subtle way, but then you might miss it. So that's just his philosophy, which is a fine filmmaking philosophy to have, and it works perfectly in this one. It's my favorite of his, I think. Insomnia. I like Insomnia. This is one I could maybe do a rewatch on. It has been a few years since I've last seen it. I'm still going to put it in the still good category for me. It's just like I haven't seen the original, which I need to check out. I've heard it's very good, the original, but I haven't seen it. So, got to work with what I have, what I have seen. And, I think it's a solid, it does what it's trying to do very effectively. I don't have a ton to say on it. It almost felt like it was a studio testing the waters. He did Memento. That was like a big thing, right? And then they're like, okay, well, let's give you a little bit of a budget. I mean, these are movies that don't exist anymore, right? Like the $40 million mid-budget movie. It feels like they very rarely exist anyway. But it seemed like this was kind of his first test. And once he passed that one, he got Batman, which I think the Batman movies might get me into some trouble here when I give my opinions on them. And by into some trouble, I think one or two people might comment negatively about it, which is, of course, fine. Feel free to comment any way you want to. Also, I should mention, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Be really appreciative as, that helps me out. My goal is to get to 1,000 subscribers. We'll get there before too long. So I'll stop bugging you once we get there. But yeah, anyway, back to Batman Begins. It's good. It's just, again, it feels like just a kind of like a solid superhero movie. It's not a genre I'm particularly crazy about, but which is part of why I kind of mentioned earlier. I think some people might be higher on the Batman movies than me. It's just not where I'm at, I don't think. But it still is, I would say, a very, very fun and accessible action movie, and did a good job of setting up the franchise. And if I remember correctly, Jonathan Nolan was not involved in that one. Jonathan Nolan was only involved in the other two, interestingly enough. But yeah, The Prestige, this is a really fun one. I don't think I'm in between on the Obituary and in the box set, but I think I'm gonna go with in the box set here. I think it's really good. It's an absolute blast, and again, it's another one that I could see people putting in the Obituary. I would have it just slightly below because I think there's a couple other better ones that we'll talk about in just a second. But yeah, again, this is kind of, I don't know. It's interesting where, for one thing, I always forget that The Prestige came after Batman Begins. In my head, it's before Batman Begins, but no, it was after Batman Begins, so there is that. But I don't know. It just feels like it is Nolan-y, but it doesn't feel full Nolan-y, right? We would see, I think kind of the rest of his movies all feel like Nolan movies. I would say every single one of the movies he makes after this feels like a Nolan movie. This is kind of the last one where he was, going more of a traditional route while still doing his Christopher Nolan tricks. So, a very fun one. The twist is fun. Michael Caine blasting it. Yeah, in the box set. The Dark Knight, this is the one that I think people might be critical of, my opinion on it. I still think it's very good. I'm just putting it in the box set. I know it's some people's favorite movie. So, obviously, you're going to have that in the top tier there. My critique with The Dark Knight is I just feel like the great scenes are 10 out of 10, amazing, fantastic scenes. I'll watch them 100 times over and never get bored. I just feel like there's some fat in this. There's that whole 20-minute sequence early on where it's, I feel like I don't even fully know what's going on there. No one loves his sort of like film noir style stuff, and it feels like there is some of that early on in this one, which doesn't really fully work for me. There's even some sequences later on that I'm not fully into. Again, who cares? When you're watching the movie, there's these amazing sequences, and of course, Heath Ledger is unbelievable in this movie. Absolutely fantastic. We all know it. One of the more iconic performances of all time. It's a great movie. It's just, I think there's a couple of movies that I would say are a little bit better that he's made. I can't put all of them in the obituary, right? You can't have Christopher Nolan passed away, was known for making, and then list all of his movies. You got to cut it off at a certain point. So that's just kind of how I view it. Great movie. Inception so this is another one I recently rewatched for this video. I think it's an obituary one. I really do. And this feels like, kind of talked about earlier, there's a couple movies that feels like he's been trying to recreate. It does feel like Inception's another one he's kind of tried to recreate a little bit with Tenet, which we'll get to later on. Inception's really interesting because this is what kind of elevated him to not just like a big budget director, but like the big budget director one. This was kind of his movie that they said, you know what, here's a bunch of money, go out and do your thing. And then it didn't just succeed, but it succeeded so much that basically they said, you know what, do whatever you want. We'll write you whatever check, you want. For the most part, I guess there was a falling out, but for the most part, they're like, you're good. Let's make this happen, whatever movie you want. What's interesting about Inception is, in rewatching it, it really is 85% explaining stuff. Like, I don't even think I'm exaggerating with that. Like, there's so much exposition in this movie, but I think the reason why it doesn't bother me that much is I'm interested in learning the exposition. I'm interested in learning, like, oh yeah, how do the mechanics of this dream world thing work? I think that there's, most people watch this movie and just enjoy it. Then there's some people that are like, well, there are a lot of like sort of flaws in this. Like, this isn't like fully, there's some clunky writing at certain points and things like that. And there are people that dislike this film as well. And I'm not going to say that those flaws are invalid, but I think it's one of those things where when watching it, I just don't care, like, really that much. I'm just like, yeah, sure. What are you doing now? The character's saying, actually, we can't do this because there's this new dream thingy that, I forgot to tell you about until right now. So now we can't do what would obviously make sense to do. We have to instead do something a lot more difficult, which is just getting us to a cool set piece. It's like, okay, I know what you're doing here. I know how you wrote this to just try and create the cool set piece. But okay, cool. Let's watch the cool set piece now, right? Like that's kind of how I view Inception for me. I think it's, again, not exactly a hot take to say Inception. Very good movie. Next up, we have The Dark Knight Rises, which is, not my thing. It just isn't. I've already, if I'm lower on the other two Batman movies, I'm certainly going to be lower on this one probably. I don't know. I just didn't, none of it really felt, I didn't get any of it that I was going for, to be honest. Like, I just didn't, this, quote unquote cool set pieces in this one didn't really work for me. None of the character decisions really made sense, and it did feel way all over the place, especially in the final act. Again, it has been a while since I've seen it. It's probably been at least like 5 years since I've seen it. So it is possible that if I gave it a rewatch, I would like it more. That has happened with some Nolan movies, like including Inception, which I was lower on in the past, but when I rewatched it, the flaws didn't bother me as much. So I'll totally acknowledge it's potentially one I just need to give a rewatch. But as of right now, it's in the one to forget category for me. I think that, again, you had to make a sequel after how The Dark Knight ended. You also, and just how much money it made, and also Heath Ledger passing away made it a lot more difficult to, you had to come up with a whole new thing on the spot. The very cool imagery. It's a great looking movie. That's the one thing I guess you could say, but it's just not my thing. Again, my own personal preference is coming into play here. If you disagree, cool. We're here to talk about movies, not necessarily even though it's a tier ranking thing, this is, of course, completely subjective. Interstellar is next on the list. So Interstellar was kind of the big, like, what is going to happen now? Coming off Inception, coming off of the Dark Knight trilogy, which that's over now. We're in the, the post-Dark Knight phase at this point. What's going to happen? And with this, sci-fi movie coming out, I fully remember the hype around this. The hype was unreal heading into this movie. And when I first watched it in theaters, I wasn't crazy about it. I thought that there was, again, so many classic Nolan like tricks of like, I think the exposition or sort of the, certain using things that to me didn't really feel like a movie moment and more felt like a we're trying to get to this set piece now moment thing bothered me the first time I watched it a little bit. That wasn't a killer, but then the end of the movie I hated, and I recently rewatched Interstellar. I went to a friend's house. I got the 4K because he has like this giant TV. I'm like, okay, let's watch it. It'll be a fun movie. And I liked it way more on a rewatch. I think that knowing kind of the flaws, and knowing that I wouldn't like the ending going in, I think made me enjoy the first part a lot more. And I really do see why this is. Again, it's another one where this is some people's favorite movie. Like, I have a good friend whose favorite movie is Interstellar, and I can understand why. There's a lot of great stuff in it. It's a very fun sort of adventure movie. We don't get a lot of adventure movies, and I like adventure movies. So all that part is great. I still dislike the ending. I still, I don't know. I prefer Sunshine. That's just me. I think that's a better movie because I like the ending more in that one. Although some people hate that ending too. So I don't know. Maybe I'll do an Alex Garland tier list and we'll talk about that at some point. But again, Interstellar is great. It's a fantastic movie. This is going to be a in the box set one for me because of, even though I didn't love the ending, what it did elsewhere, what the other parts of it were. So yeah, big fan of that one. Dunkirk is next on the list. Another one I rewatched before I had the idea for this tier list. I just happened to rewatch it like a month ago, and it's very fun, very good. I do feel like, for me personally, I wish there was more of the character. I get that that's the point. I get the point is you don't care about, it's not about the characters, individually, and kind of more about the whole of them. But it's still, I do wish that there was more there. Like, it just, as cool as some of the set pieces are, as again, it's very much a Nolan idea of, hey, let's play around with time here. Let's have different storylines interweaving the way like they do like that. Very cool, very fun. It's just not quite my favorite Nolan movie because I don't really have any emotional pull. Like I said, I prefer Nolan when the characters and the plot kind of intertwine, and this one really kind of feels like you could replace any of the characters and it wouldn't make much of a difference. So for me, it's still good. It's a very good movie. Again, I own it on 4K, right? Like, I enjoy this movie. That's what I did, is I watched it on that. So it's a good movie. Just, again, not one of Nolan's best, in my opinion. Tenet is next on this list. Tenet is, I think that, like, for the longest time, there have been criticisms of Nolan, of like, oh, there's the too much exposition, plots are way too confusing, like the characters, doesn't really care about them whatsoever. It's not less about the characters, more about the plot. And I think those things were always like true factors, and they're even things I've brought up in this. But I feel like in Tenet, it really kind of almost felt like a bit of like a parody of what he does typically. And it's a bummer because I do think he put a lot of effort into this. I think there's a lot of good and interesting stuff in Tenet. And I do think in some ways this kind of colors the rest of Nolan's filmography, which is all very good. Again, I only have one movie so far that I disliked, at this point. I think every other one I at least enjoyed. I think for Tenet, to me, he was doing the Inception thing, and like people are going to say he tried, and I should mention also, there's people who love Tenet. Like there's like a whole subreddit dedicated to all the different things of Tenet, and good for those people. I'm not gonna, I'm glad they like a movie. But again, for me with Tenet, I think what he did with Tenet was very similar to what he did with Inception, and maybe even almost the exact same thing as what he did with Inception in terms of how he wrote it. Of let's get this really complex thing of what if time, you could go in this box and then it causes you to go backwards in time, but in the same, speed that you go forwards in time. And then, okay, very complex thing. And now let's spend most of the movie talking about that thing. Like in Inception, I do legitimately believe Nolan isn't sitting there writing Inception saying, okay, but how do I get this information to the audience? Okay, I'll just have them tell it. I think he's writing the exposition in Inception with the mindset of, the audience is going to like hearing about this. This is going to be cool for the audience to hear about. And for Tenet, he did the same thing. I just think most audience members weren't as interested in that as they were about like a dream world thing. I think that it was just a more fascinating story with Inception. A lot of people talk about the confusing nature of Tenet. Again, I think that it kind of requires you to kind of sit at the edge of your seat and thoroughly pay close attention to it, which for a lot of audience members, you're just not going to want to do if you're not that into something, and you're going to kind of lose you at a certain point. You might think about what you want for lunch during a certain exposition scene, and now you have no idea what's going on. I also feel like the time stuff is pretty clear. I feel like I pretty well understand all the time stuff. Remember, I've only seen it once, so everyone says you got to watch it a second time. One day I will. But again, I think for all the time stuff, it all made sense to me, like how, the time worked, the loop and all that I got. It was more so just that extra kind of like spy thriller twist on it that like I was just like, I don't care about this at all. Like this was just not into it for me whatsoever. There's people that love this movie, but I think this is one to forget. Even though I think there's good parts of it, I think that part of why I would put it in one to forget instead of meh is because of it almost like people can like now point to it in Nolan's filmography and say, oh, well, I don't like him because of this, and this. Like Tenet, that's the one where he did all those things, right? That to me, that feels like one you can point to. So that's why I would have it in that tier. Last but not least, Oppenheimer, the one that won him an Oscar, won Best Picture, and won 5 other Oscars at the ceremony just recently happened. This feels kind of obvious. It's an on the obituary one for me, and I really think it's, I'd probably say it's my second favorite Nolan movie as of right now. I think I would go, if I'm doing order, I guess I would do that for at least the top 3. I think it's really good. I think that there's always going to be a pushback when a film wins Best Picture, just in general. Oh, you liked that one the best, whatever. It is what it is, because when you win Best Picture, everyone then sees that movie, and more people see it than otherwise would, because, oh, it's the one that won Best Picture, and then like, wait, that one was the best movie, but I like this movie better, therefore, it's actually not as good as people say it is. Well, no, the chances are you're not going to like that's one movie versus like 100 movies that you could have potentially seen. Of course, there's probably going to be another movie you like better that year. Anyway, whole thing. But I think it's really good. Again, it's one where it's about something. I don't know if you would say it's like the most thorough character study you've ever seen put to film, but given what else it's doing, and it still is, I think, a pretty solid character study. I think the people that don't understand why the final third of the movie, I kind of felt like, no, that's completing the character, I don't know, character arc, but the argument that the film is making throughout the movie, which I think is necessary. It's not about building the bomb. Again, like I said, it's about the character, and while maybe you could have tried to find a way to end the character arc with also the completion of the bomb, I don't really know how you would have done that. So I actually thought it was well done, the way that Nolan did it. I love the score. I love the fast-paced editing. Some people dislike that stuff. I was all about it. To me, this is, again, Nolan at the height of his powers. This is the kind of Nolan I like to see. So, yeah, I mean, as a whole, I'm a fan of Nolan. Like I said, I'm not a Nolan stan, but I am a fan of Nolan. There are things that always drive me crazy with some of his movies, but in fact, I think there's every single movie I can come up with one thing that I'm like, why did he do that? Like even the top ones, the Memento, the scene where the one woman says like, I'm going to tell you my whole plan now because you won't remember it anyway, and then lists like a ton of like horrible, awful insults towards him, like saying like just the worst possible things you can think of. I'm like, okay, that's a bit over the top. Oppenheimer, I thought that there was a couple of clunky dialogue scenes that I could get into it. Same thing with Inception, but like are there flaws in each of his movies? Sure. At the same time, though, I almost feel like his movies get so much attention that, like, yeah, you're going to notice flaws. And it's possible that, with the exception of a couple other directors that I'm also a huge fan of, there's other filmmakers who might make a movie that has a flaw in it, but they just aren't as popular. So I'm like, whatever. Like, I think that's probably part of it as well, is once there's someone out there that says, oh, Christopher Nolan is the greatest director ever. All his movies are perfect. And if you don't agree, then you're an idiot. Well, then you're probably going to be like, well, no, what about this one flaw? But like, at the end of the day, when you're watching it, like, I don't think I really care that much about the flaws. It's just some kind of after the fact. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Or maybe I'll notice it for a minute. Like, again, the Memento thing. I'll notice his, the one bad dialogue scene, and then afterwards I'm immediately back into the story. Stuff like that. I don't know. That's how I view Nolan. Those are my thoughts on all of his movies. Bit of a long video, but yeah, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.